You don't have to have the same dream when you start a company, but you definitely have to know what each other's dream is.
Our featured speaker today is a former entrepreneur, and a current entrepreneur, and an educator. And as an educator, Maria understands the importance of fostering a culture of innovation and empowering teams to take risks and explore new opportunities. Maria, it's a great pleasure to have you returning as our featured guest today. Thank you so much for being willing to share your journey with us.
Thank you for having me again. It's so exciting. I really have been looking forward to it.
Well, the honor's all ours. We're excited. So I introduced you as a former entrepreneur, but I know we're going to get into your new project and kind of leading into that. I understand you're currently pursuing a master's degree in space entrepreneurship. That sounds pretty fascinating. Can you talk about how that came about?
Okay, so about 2 years ago, I was an event that was facilitated by Innovation Center Denmark with their different departments around the world. And there was one from Silicon Valley that was talking about the new space economy. And even though I had actually been doing a guest speak at the ESA BIG, European Space Agency Incubation Center in Denmark a few years before that, in regards to 24 steps, discipline entrepreneurship, the framework from MIT. At that time, I didn't really think about that was an area that I would think would be interesting. But then when I heard about the new space economy and actually could see the financial benefits of the area. So yeah, I have the commercial background, right? So then I was thinking, okay, that actually is quite interesting to see how they are expecting an exponential growth in that area over the next 10 years. After that, I was looking into how do I actually want to get into this area. If we talk about different technologies in space, I wasn't going to pursue an engineering background. So I was thinking like, how do I actually become familiar with what's important to know in regards to the new space economy? So I started out with a course at edX that it's called New Space Economy. And that definitely gave me some insight and also a hunger for more. I was talking to ESA BIG and about possibilities there. And they were also saying that for them, it's important also that you have some sort of background in terms of the different technologies, or at least some sort of knowledge of what it means to have a space technology compared to other kinds of technologies. And that's why I was just thinking, okay, this is too difficult. I was listening to different podcasts and reading newsletters, but it just didn't give me the framework where I was knowing for sure that I was using my time right. So that's why I was thinking, okay, I need some sort of education. And so that's why I started looking for something that had entrepreneurship in it, because that's my area, both in terms of what I teach, but also in terms of my background. I was looking at different kinds of educations, and they do have some on-site educations around the world, but due to my family reason, I knew I couldn't move somewhere. So I was looking for something online, and that's where I stumbled across this master in space entrepreneurship from ICE, European Institute of Innovation and Sustainability. And I figured that would be a good match. So I applied and I had an interview. So it's not like you know for sure that you can actually participate in the class, because they are selective also in who they want on board, just like MIT with our bootcamp. But yeah, I got selected luckily and started in October last year. It's been quite interesting because the teaching is very much the way we teach. So it's learning by doing. Curriculum is more articles and videos, and most of all, assignments. Assignments from class to class, where we need to look into different aspects of space technologies.
I'll be totally honest with you. I'm a little obsessed with the future of space entrepreneurship, and it's something that I spend a unhealthy amount of time thinking about and talking about, much to my lovely partner's chagrin. It feels like a space that people currently attribute very much to the engineers. It's like you have to have this engineering degree. But I think the reality is what the space industry needs is actually not the engineering. Like there's already lots of engineers very interested in it. But what it actually needs is the business perspective, the entrepreneurship perspective, the finance perspective, all those sort of more murky realms to come in and start to flesh out what the space industry is going to be to really understand it. Because the engineering perspective is just the technical side. It doesn't show like the reality of the user experience, of the business perspective, all that sort of things. And so you said you started in October last year. What sort of things do you think you've been able to dig into and understand in the last 7 months about this to sort of see where it's going in a sense?
Before I started, what I've heard most about is Elon Musk and rockets. And we have our famous astronaut in Denmark, Andreas Mogensen. And so it was pretty much that I had heard about. What surprised me the most is the way they expect the tourism to grow. And of course, that's quite a long time before that will happen. But that's something we need to think about already now, because there's so many areas that we need to think about in terms of starting sending tourists out in space. And then also with the habitats that they're talking about, is it on Mars, and do we need something on the moon first, and how should we do that? It's about having some sort of warehouses in space that will make it easier to navigate around in terms of between Mars, the moon, and the Earth. And so there are so many aspects I never thought about. For me, it was just like new space economy. It sounds like you can earn a lot of money in that area. I need to know more, not only for me, but also for my students. So it's not only about that. I was about to say not only about I want to get rich, because it's nothing to do with that. It's more that I want to see, can we get more startups in this area? So right now, what I'm actually also working on is to bridge the Technical University of Denmark with the students at our University of Applied Science, because I was talking to a student from the Master in Technical Entrepreneurship at DTU who is pursuing something in terms of space, actually something like this warehouse I was talking about before. And he said, we are 5 engineers. None of us know how to make a website. And I said, okay, well, we have a lot of students that can do that. So I put him together with the teacher of multimedia design, and now he has a student that helps out with that. And that kind of bridging is where I see that we can get more startups. And also in terms of what you just said before, a lot of engineers that are working on different technologies, but we actually have quite a lot of technologies that work quite well in space now. So we need to commercialize this. And who are better at commercializing that than those that are coming with the commercial background? So yeah, that's definitely what we need to start looking at taking advantage of that now.
I think it's, so amazing that you got together with this, group of other students and started this project. And I was wondering if you can take us into it a little bit more deeply and how you decided to work with this team of people, what you were looking for in a team.
This is a quite funny story. So the school has this rule that every time we've had a class, we have a new assignment, but we also work with new people from the class. So we're 24 people in the class. And that was really nice in the beginning because, you get to know people. And since it's an online class, it could be hard otherwise. But at some point, you could definitely tell exactly what happens when I'm a teacher. We have different ambition level. We are there for different reasons. We are also in very different parts of the world. So there's a time zone difference as well. And right before Christmas, I got together with some guys that were saying, hey, we are getting a little bit bored doing these fake assignments or whatever we should call them, or cases, just cases. Why don't we start our own company, solve the task with that? I was just thinking, yeah, of course, that sounds so much more interesting. And at that time, the assignment was in terms of sustainability and how the space tech or the space entrepreneurship area could develop and evolve in terms of solving the climate changes and climate difficulties we have. So that was actually where it started. And so in the team, we have 2 engineers. They were looking, well, how can we actually look at the issue, and we started looking into where is the problem the most, and all the things that you actually talk about or think about when you are an entrepreneur. So we were thinking that when we looked into different technologies, so we have a lot of data from satellites, but the challenge is actually a lot of that data is not really being used efficiently, especially not when you talk about that actually can be used in terms of these environmental issues we have. So in Europe, we have a lot of regulation in terms of sustainability and this ESG. And I would say that in the beginning, we didn't think about Europe at first because 4 other in the team are guys that are all from Latin America. And so we were first thinking maybe it makes more sense to start there. But when we looked into that, we realized that actually is quite corrupt, meaning that it might be quite difficult to start there. And so because Europe has so many regulation and more coming, we realized with a lot of research that it actually make more sense to start over here. So this was what we've been working on since January. It was also, so I'm actually the CEO. And when we were talking about roles, in the beginning, it was what makes sense. Of course, the 2 engineers, it made sense what they should do. We have one who is working a lot in terms of making websites and art director. So it made sense that he would be sitting with the marketing. We have an innovation manager who's been working a lot with different tech areas, doing different projects for companies. And so it made sense that he was sitting with the innovation part. And then when we were talking about me, at first I was like, where can I see myself? Of course, I'm a teacher. I keep telling people what they need to do. So it actually made sense at that time. I said, yeah, okay, let me do it. And it turned out that it's been a very interesting journey. We had to find each other, of course, because they had come from a very different culture than I do. So I'm very open, involved way of being a CEO, where they come from a more strict. And that's actually what they were very nervous about, that they said, we wanted to pursue this master to be independent. And now we're ending up having a CEO. That's not an issue at all anymore. And actually what has happened is that they say, we love your style. And even though it's very new to us, and I can see that all the different theories and models I'm teaching my students, I can use them now. With its ups and downs, for sure. I can definitely tell that some things that I didn't understand why the students thought was so difficult, I can definitely tell now.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, as weird as it sounds, like the skills needed for a teacher and the skills needed for like a CEO, I feel are actually quite overlapped, I would say. I think there's a lot of need for patience in both. I think there's a lot of need for like understanding of the person you're talking to. Can you talk a little bit about, from your perspective, the learnings that you've grabbed from sort of teaching that you think apply to being a CEO, and then also the inverse?
It's a lot of what you just mentioned. I think in terms of being persistent, setting the direction, but also be open to that, trusting that people use their competences and qualities. So not micromanaging, but just setting the direction, which is also what I do in my teaching. Definitely is quite a good fit. The guys on my team, they're very experienced. Some have over 20 years of experience and some have maybe 6 years plus. And that's the difference between my students, where they really can get very insecure of what to do, and they want me sometimes to repeat it a lot because they are uncertain if they're doing it right. I don't have to do that with my team. They want me to help setting the direction so that we are clear that we're all going in the right direction, but not this that's not the same uncertainty. That's the big difference.
It makes a lot of sense. This is such an exciting, journey that you're on too. So I don't know that we've asked you this directly. Can you talk about how the Space Data Labs is going to kind of like help expand our understanding of outer space? And, is there any problem that you're aiming to specifically solve, or are you just studying something?
So actually, we were on a study trip to Airbus defense facility in Munich 2 weeks ago. And that changed, not that we pivot, but where we were focused on a smaller area before in terms of ESG and focusing on how can we connect space data, the drones with AI, and figuring out how can we see where CO2, there's too much CO2 coming out, for instance, in real time. Because right now the challenge is that once the satellites has recognized that there's too much, they go to so this is for like a Danish situation, they go to the law enforcement in the government, but then they don't necessarily have something going to the next level in terms of actually doing the enforcement to the company who has been letting out too much CO2, for instance. Or we've had a big case with oil slip in the oceans. Satellite data will come and say, hey, it looks like there's an oil slip, but they don't have something to follow up. But actually what it's been until now is that other ships passing by, they would have people literally looking over the railing and looking, yeah, that looks like oil. Okay, it looks like there are a lot of oil here. They would never be able to go to a company and saying, hey, you've had this big oil slip. This requires a big fine to you. So that could be an instance. But even though we have, after doing a lot of research, found a big competitor, it would take some time to actually make this solution that can help us. Because when we are talking about Europe and this ESG, and of course we can't be a law enforcement if we are not 100% accurate with the data. And that takes some time to make sure that solution is correct. So what we have been researching on and elaborating on during that trip to Munich is that a lot of difficulties right now in terms of there is so much data, both up in space, but also actually on the ground on Earth. So that gives a lot of heat up. Now we're talking up in the satellites. So if they should be able to make sure that a lot more data can come in and out, because the data centers on Earth are being almost full now, how can we get rid of that heat up in space? So that was an issue we were looking at at Airbus. But what we were thinking is that that's interesting to look at from an engineering perspective. But for me, for instance, that would take me a long time before I would actually have a lot of interest in using my competences in that. So how can we actually, instead of just looking at one area and saying, how can we use our competences the best in terms of trying to do what we want the most? And that's actually saving lives. That has been like an umbrella for us, saying we want to use space technologies to save more lives on Earth. So that goes into a lot of areas, also into defense. Of course, we also had to, when we were looking at that, saying, okay, we need to look at the disciplined entrepreneurship approach and chase more than one rabbit. So how do we do this? So what we've done is instead saying, so I have a special competence with this teaching. My rabbit will be to figure out how can we help getting more startups by teaching more people in terms of this. So that's, for instance, having boot camps with pupils. They can become familiar with all these technologies, because right now they also just think space is about rockets, but space is so much more. And how can we actually teach them that? So we have our marketing director who's then looking at how can I help space companies getting the word out that they actually have this solution in terms of making websites, for instance. So we each have now our own rabbit, and then we still have our common rabbit, which is this with the ESG law enforcement. I don't even remember the question anymore, but anyway, that was about what we were doing. So in that way, we can have different tracks, but still having a clear path that shouldn't intertwine with each other. So I'm really trying to have my 24 steps framework in the back. What I've realized is that engineers have a hard time to follow this if they're not familiar with, because they just want to make MVPs, right? So this with keeping track.
Well said.
Yeah. So this with keeping track of what does the market want, what does the market need, has actually been our guidance in terms of this.
Absolutely. Engineers, certainly, myself included, always want to be working on the cool new tech.
Hi there. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you mind leaving us a review, a like, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform? Thanks so much. That really helps our reach. The Founders Voyage podcast is now proudly sponsored by VidOps. Kane at VidOps has been taking care of our editing since early 2024. He works efficiently, and I'm sure you'll agree that he does a great job. Thank you to VidOps for helping bring this podcast to life. If you want the same great support we're getting for your podcast, or you need help with video, photography, or animation, you can get 10% off at vidops.io using our referral code Voyage. That's vidops.io, referral code Voyage. Now back to the show.
Now, it feels like for the space industry, data and its application and its sort of gathering and coalescing into a useful version is a really powerful, accessible currently market, right? The data space feels super, super relevant currently. So I think that's a really good place that you've sort of started to approach. Now, you talked about a little bit about the different members focusing on different rabbits, but you have this one coalesced rabbit that you sort of collectively view. Can you talk about how sort of from your perspective over time, your leadership and your sort of guidance approach, how you've approached guiding others and working with others has changed over time?
I can compare now with Yellowman, my first company, right? So there's a huge difference in terms of getting everybody on board. This recognition of that we all have different backgrounds, meaning we all have different mindsets. So how can we be aligned? Super, super important. And I never thought about it when I had Yellowman. And I never even think about that could actually have been the issue for us also way back then. That's definitely a big difference that I also can see in my students first, because I have quite a lot of students that actually have already tried to start their own company and are coming to us because they can see we just like I thought about the space entrepreneurship, that you need education, some sort of foundation in order to make sure that you get the right start. What I also hear from them is exactly this we never thought about the importance of being aligned in the team and the urgency of making sure that you are the right team from the beginning. And how do you find out? So, with me and the guys, as I call them, I didn't know from the beginning. I felt like I'd found my people somehow. Just had this instinct that I need to follow this, and I need to figuring out why I think that they are the right people. We are so diverse, but yet we still have something in common, maybe also because we have a lot of experience, that we definitely know what we want and what we don't want in terms of starting a company. This will ensure that you don't have to have the same dream when you start a company, but you definitely have to know what each other's dream is. So my reason for being an entrepreneur now is not the same as some of the other ones, but that doesn't matter as long as we know that we are always going in the direction where it benefits us, the purpose for all of us. Otherwise, we will have someone who's unhappy. And if we have someone on the team who's unhappy, we're never going to get what we need and get to where we need.
And I appreciate what you're sharing too about finding that deep alignment with your team, because I feel like there's so much advice out there that you can find teammates, I'm not technical, I've got a technical co-founder, but if you don't find that deep alignment that drives you, Spencer would be our technical one between the two of us, but, really find that deep driving passion that you share and share some values in addition to maybe sharing some of the vision. What I really love to understand from you is, where do you kind of envision this taking space technology? And I guess, how do you envision the future of space technology? We were actually talking about that just as a topical conversation for fun a couple of weeks ago, but you proposed some really interesting ideas. So I guess 5 years from now, where would you like your startup to be? And where do you kind of see space technology?
That vision actually came clear when we were in Munich and had this talk. My vision is that space data labs is actually there where you see the new technologies coming out from. But not only the technologies, actually the startups. So just like we were talking about now, so it's not when you have an interesting technology to pursue, you get the PhD student on board, but then you actually help that person navigate in terms of what it is to make a startup. So it's not only about making the MVP, it's actually also the other thing, but maybe that PhD student is not good at that, but then we can circle all the right people around that. My vision would be to see that when we're talking about space entrepreneurship or how is this progressing, you go to space data labs because that's where it happens, so to speak. That's my vision. But in 5 years, I don't know if I'm too optimistic, but yeah, I would like to see that for sure. I can also see all the other things that I want. I can see that in that, right? So I can still be the bridge between the university and the universities of applied science in that matter. Yeah.
No, I think that's brilliant. I think, honestly, if I'm totally straight with you, I think there's a lot of PhDs in very, very fascinating, very, very impactful areas that are sort of left to the wayside by society. Because as an engineer who has worked in sort of the mass production space, it's a totally different beast to take a really complex, really exciting new technology and turn it into a mass production technology. It's not saying one's, more intelligent than the other or anything, but they're like, it needs that bridge to sort of transition and to understand the entrepreneurship side, the business side, how to like reassess priorities and things. And I think what you're saying is a great position to be in, because it's going to have a huge positive impact on the world. I'm looking forward to hearing about sort of how that changes over time in the future. 5 years from now, I think you're going to be doing incredible things.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. One thing is that exciting, but it is really crazy to think about, that it's happened so fast. When I think about a year ago, I barely knew what new space economy was. And now I'm here and it's a steep, steep learning curve, but it's also super, super exciting. I love learning about it and I can't get enough of it. So I actually also became an ambassador for Space Denmark. And it's a quite new organization in Denmark that are looking into how can we pursue this more, helping the whole ecosystem that we also got at MIT. Like if we work together, we can achieve more. And this is what Space Denmark is aiming for. And that's also what I see when I talk with people in the area, that people want to help each other.
Yeah. And that's such a big point with the space economy, because no one individual can totally take it. Like, it's so huge that it has to be people working together to create something incredible. I'd love to understand from your perspective. You've talked about where you want to be in 5 years, but what would you define as like success for you? If you were to, imagine yourself later in life looking back on this and be like, this was a success, not just a business side, obviously that's something we're interested in, but from a life perspective as well. How do you perceive success?
My first thought when you asked me was, what do I give to my children? And for me, the most important is to follow your dreams. No matter where this takes me, what it has already done in such a short time, I show my children that you can create your own future. You can take it in your own hand and just believe that the obstacles that could be on the way, they will be solved somehow. Maybe we don't know why. Maybe it sounds crazy to begin with, but you do it anyway. So for instance, with this, so it obviously cost quite a lot of money, and money that I didn't have, but I just knew I needed this master. And I knew that I couldn't get my school to pay. So what I did was, luckily I could get a loan from one of my friends. Even though I had this back in my mind, I was a little bit nervous for like, how am I gonna pay back? But I had this like, okay, I need to believe and trust the universe that somehow it will be solved. What happened was that I was awarded the Teacher of the Year at my school.
Well done.
Thank you.
It's incredible.
Thank you so much. So, but I didn't know that with that prize came an amount that matched perfectly how much it actually cost to take this master. And actually, I was only allowed to use the money for extending my competences. So what I said is it okay to pay or something I'm already started since I haven't finished yet and it matched what I teach? They say, yeah, sure. So then it got solved, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
What a brilliant lesson to share with your children. That's so good.
So this was believing, and you will regret what you didn't do, not what you did when you look back when you get old, no matter what the outcome is, right?
Yeah, I think it's such a powerful way to, evaluate the success of, the choices in front of you. And I really appreciate that, your first thought in that question was, what am I going to leave behind for my children? And congratulations on that award. And what wonderful incentive to be an amazing teacher too.
Yeah.
Since this is not your first venture, I was kind of thinking, maybe you would have a perspective at this point on how you feel like the entrepreneurship landscape in Denmark has kind of evolved. Do you feel like it's become easier or more difficult since you started your first company for young entrepreneurs, or I should just say entrepreneurs in general, but do you feel like the barriers that existed, do you feel like there are more of them or less of them?
Less. It's become much easier. I know right now in Denmark, there is a lot of talk about it's still difficult to be a startup. But if you look back from when I started, it was really difficult to find investors or business angels. You really had to know the right people, where now there are competitions all the time. They're always out scouting. It's so much more transparent, like how you can get investment and also soft money. There are a lot of more opportunities in getting soft money in Denmark than there used to be, and also in Europe in general. And if you talk about space, that has become a big area in Denmark and Europe also. So in Denmark now, if you say you are a space startup, especially if you're a tech space startup, so if you have invented something, you are in defense, like, okay, the money is almost just coming. So that's a part of why we wanted to look into defense. But our main purpose is this, like, how can we look at this about saving life instead of defense is about keep fighting and finding solution so we can better fight each other, right?
The unfortunate reality right now is that we're going into a time that does require Europe, which I would say has been at the forefront of, treating people with respect and concern about human life. Europe needs to start sort of taking defense more seriously and actively being a bigger part of that. But I love your approach to being like, this is important, but how do we approach it in a way that we're worried about saving lives, not taking from others? I think that's a beautiful way to sort of reframe the perspective on this problem going forward. Now, you've talked a little bit about your first startup, Yellowman. Just to put a little bit of pressure on, like, what do you see as sort of the learnings you've had from that experience coming into this new startup? Are there any sort of similarities that you see and you're like, learnings that I've had and how I apply it? Or do you consider it to be totally separate?
I don't know if I would put it like totally separate, but more that I can see now what I didn't know when I had Yellowman. I think that's more the main learning that taking, and that comes from my teaching. And especially the 24 steps framework, that is with knowing what is the problem you want to solve. How do you see that problem market fit? And once you have that, then do you actually have a solution market fit? Then you can go to the business plan. Where with Yellowman, we didn't have that framework at all. It was more the lean startup approach, like learning by doing. We go with what we have and then we see how we can evolve. Where here we are much more focused on having these matches in order to figuring out it, because we might end up figuring out this is not worth pursuing as it is right now, at least, We don't know that, but knowing what kind of research to do beforehand so I don't end in the same situation as last time, that has definitely is a big change for me and also makes me more comfortable in terms of starting up, because I've had this question quite a lot from both students and others, because I teach innovation entrepreneurship. Hey, don't you want to do your own startup again? And I always said, not unless I have this feeling that I would regret not do it. And that's how I feel right now. I need to see where this takes me.
Well said. Really, really well said.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I appreciate like how you think about, the world at large and every step, that you're taking, like just kind of how it's going to translate into that impact. Can you talk a little bit about how you found work-life balance at this current stage in your journey? Because I just keep picturing like how many things you're trying to do. And I love, your passion for your children and your family. How easy or difficult has that been to find that balance now?
Well, of course, it's been difficult struggling with. One thing was the master. Luckily, I have a really nice mom who can take care of the children when I do my master classes. The startup was an issue in terms of we always had the meeting right after I had picked up my youngest, and that was, dinner time, and was not a good time. So I said to them, we need to have those meetings when I know my children are asleep. And that's how we solved that part. It took some time and it was definitely not easy. I really needed to also figure out, is it worth it? Because it was very important for me that this should not, my children must never feel that they are my second or third choice. There were some times where that was close to that, when my youngest started saying, don't speak English, because he knew that then I would have meeting with either my company or at my master. So I knew he needs me. So I need to make some changes. And that's what I did. And also I've been working a lot with how to not get stressed. I don't have a recipe. It's definitely about finding peace in yourself. I've been working a lot with that since I started the master. And I'm at a point now where, of course, I can't get stressed or feel like really busy. I'd rather say I can get really busy, but I don't get stressed. I balance it by saying you have the time you have. And it doesn't matter being concerned about the future, because the future will come no matter what. And you can't do anything about it. So it's easier just to go with the flow. It sounds easier than it was to actually get into that state of mind, but I feel like I'm there now.
Good. I mean, dealing with stress and like being able to find a way to deal with everything you need to deal with without having stress impact your life is honestly a superpower in entrepreneurship. And it's something I've struggled with a huge amount. I have the scenario where I sort of don't get much sleep because of stress. And so that's difficult. But I think the approach you've taken of the future's going to come and me being stressed about it doesn't diminish the difficulty of it is very, very wise. I think it requires a certain level of self-control that some people struggle with, myself included, but I think it's very impressive to sort of be able to approach that. And I really, really like you sharing that with us. Thank you.
But there are a lot of startups that actually get burned out because of this and need to close down. So I think it's becoming a subject in Denmark now. So I can see that at DTU, for instance, they take this very seriously, and they're starting to having classes and different offers to startups so they can help them in this area.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. It's something that more of society should take seriously, if I'm totally honest with you. Hopefully that's going to come in the future. Now, what I'd love to ask you is a little bit about in entrepreneurship and sort of the focus concept of the space entrepreneurship, if you have any recommendations on places to look or resources to analyze for people who sort of are really interested in the space economy or space entrepreneurship, but don't know where to sort of start.
Definitely this course at edX.org, it's called New Space Economy. I think it's 6 or 8 weeks or something like that. It's not that difficult. but it gives you the foundation of what does it mean. That would definitely be my recommendation. And you can take that free of charge. And then once you think you have the interest, then you can pursue something like I did with the master. But there are a lot of newsletters out there, podcasts, even books. But books are a little bit more difficult because quite often they go into some sort of space tech. But there are a few books out there in terms of entrepreneurship. If you want to be an entrepreneur in the area, I would definitely say, depending on what your competences are, it's important you can't do this by yourself. That's once. And also what you mentioned before, it requires a lot of funding, a lot of money. So funding, either soft funding or an investment or something, because it's super, super expensive compared to doing our other kinds of startups. For instance, with Yellowman, we didn't need that much money to get started. But here you can't just do lean startup approach, right? That's impossible. So that's why you need a lot of funding and you need a team and do this by yourself. Hopefully also get into an incubator or accelerator. Yeah, not accelerator first, of course, but an incubator, find good mentors, and that would be my advice.
I think we unfortunately do have to wrap up now that we're about 5 minutes away. We always like to treat our guest time with a bit of respect. I think we actually asked you this last time, but we do like to wrap up with the same question. What words of wisdom do you want to leave us with today? From a favorite quote to advice someone else gave you, or a lesson you want to take away from your journey so far?
Do what makes you happy. If you do that, you can never have regrets, no matter what you try and pursue, and no matter where it takes you or doesn't take you. That also means what I said before, that maybe you take a chance and it didn't work out the way you wanted, but there will be no regrets.
That's excellent advice. I appreciate the simplicity of it too. Thank you again, Maria. Thank you everyone who joined us today. We always appreciate when you bring your energy and perspectives to our discussions. Spencer and I and the team behind Founders Voyage feel really fortunate to be part of this community with all of you, and for the opportunity to bring you cooperative learning experiences like this one each week. So we welcome your nominations for future interview guests and topical conversations. But in the meantime, we hope everyone has a great day and evening ahead.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
You've just finished another episode of Founders Voyage, the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. The team at Founders Voyage wants to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us, and if so, please share this with someone else who might enjoy this podcast. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and by donating to our Patreon. Outro music today is Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band.